Hello there. Welcome to Fireside with Peter Adkison on Gen Con TV. On this show, we go in search of the untold stories behind your favorite games. And this season, we have teamed up with the Dungeon Masters Guild to introduce us to all sorts of new talent who are working on Dungeons and Dragons today, bringing fresh perspectives to this amazing game, one of the greatest games of all time. Our guest today is Jacky Leung. Jacky is with Unbreakable Publishers and served as a project organizer for Unbreakable, which is a fifth edition source book for doing adventures in Asian mythology and Asian myths. So, yeah, I can't wait to get into that. So, Jacky, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Peter. Glad to be here.
Oh, glad to have you. So, yeah, thanks so much for being on our show. It's great to see you. I really enjoyed meeting you the other day when we had a couple minutes online to get to know each other, and I really seriously have been looking forward to being able to spend an hour with you, and because I just think we're going to get along really well. So, as obviously we both love D&D, and we both
Yeah.
talk about it, so it's going to be. So hey, before we dive into your work, I like to start with a little bit of sort of biographic sort of thing. Like, where were you raised? Where did you grow up? Where did you go to school? That sort of thing.
Sure. So I was born and raised in South Florida. I actually still live in the same neighborhood as where I was raised for most of it. I actually got to see my elementary school get remodeled and built on top of itself. So that was actually kind of that's how long you that's when you know you've been in the same neighborhood for too long.
Wow.
I've always been in South Florida for the most of my time. I do travel. I have family in New York City, and I also have family in other places in like California and also some in Canada who I rarely see. But otherwise, yeah, I always grew up. I'm always a Florida boy. I think a few of my friends have gotten to the phase of their lives where they probably will say that I'm probably the ultimate cryptid when it comes to being one in Florida.
And so you went to school in Florida too? Then is that?
Yeah. So I spent all. I went through. I spent my university years in Florida. I was primarily in Orlando, Florida for that. So I got to be I got to go to Disney and Universal quite a lot on my off time. And then I finished the rest of my bachelor's degree because I in back near closer to home, a little further south in Miami in Fort Lauderdale. Um and that was because I changed majors from computer engineering into psychology.
Oh, okay. Well, that psychology is a short commute from role playing games, I think, right?
Yeah, yeah. The computer. I went into college primarily as a computer and for computer engineering with focus on software integration and things like that. And then I made a big shift to psychology, and I was mostly focused on more on pharmaceuticals and clinical psychology with like a soft interest in AI and machine learning.
Sure, sure. Then did you get to work in that field professionally after school at all, or
No, unfortunately, I didn't. There in Florida, there wasn't a whole lot of programs that were really focused on those sort of things, and I kind of want to still keep it kind of local. Most of the curriculum and most of the interests for anything postgraduate was mostly focused on things like behavioral psychology and things like on the clinical side, it was more focused on things like drug and rehabilitation because that's a big industry down here for reasons. But otherwise, there wasn't a whole lot of those kind of particular interests, and I would have to go out of state for those sort of things, and I ultimately had to just kind of let those fall to the side. Um, and I kind of just spent a few years going between jobs, trying to figure out what I wanted to do. and then I managed to come back to D&D.
Well, okay. Well, we'll get to that. Let's start with the first time you got to D&D before you came back to D&D. So how did you start in playing Dungeons and Dragons?
So I started playing Dungeons and Dragons around when I was about a freshman in high school. So we're talking about the early 2000s. And I got introduced to D&D third edition, and then eventually it got changed to 3.5.
Sure.
And actually I didn't, and funny enough, my first game of D&D didn't take place until 8 months later, because my DM at the time asked me to first play Neverwinter Nights, which was a computer role-playing game.
I remember that. That was a good game.
Yep. That was a great game. I played that a lot. But he wanted me to get introduced to the Forgotten Realms and things like that, and learn and kind of loosely learn the rules, so that he could prepare me. And I didn't know what he was preparing me for, but my very first D&D campaign was an epic level campaign. So we were playing at 20th level and beyond. So that was my very first campaign, my very first experience with the dice and everything.
Wow, that's a pretty crazy my first Dungeons and Dragons game story, right? Epic level. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, we finished at 30th level.
You went from 20th to 30th level, and then and then you had to start all over again.
Well, yeah, I think after we finished that campaign, it took about a year for us to finish that campaign, and then we started playing another one, and that was a little lower tier. We were starting at 10th, and that was when we were playing in Planescape, and so we were playing in Sigil, and we were just exploring the different planes and getting into trouble. Got into quite a few times, a lot of trouble.
Oh, that's great. That's yeah. Well, do you want to tell us about getting into trouble in Planescape?
Well, I will comment that one of our characters did upset the Lady of Pain, which is always a bad thing. You should never upset the Lady of Pain. So we ended up getting exiled out of Sigil, and we got stuck in like all the Badlands and the outer areas. And we kind of had to figure out what to do and how to get back without, and also win back the Lady of Pain, her favorite, which is also harder than it sounds.
Yeah.
I remember we had to go through a gladiator pit in the middle of Pandemonium, and that was just awkward.
Oh my gosh, a gladiator pit. Oh yeah, okay, that sounds pretty. Yeah, so your GM really liked. So you started off with a lot of high level play, with a rigorous onboarding process of go play Neverwinter Nights for several months, and then we'll let you play Dungeons and Dragons with us for real. Yeah. That's crazy. It makes you wonder how many people would survive that as an ongoing, as a regular onboarding process, right?
I know it definitely would be hard for a lot of people. I know at the time, he knew that I was very interested, and so he took the time to make sure it's like, rather than him trying to teach me poorly, learn it from a game system that's already done it well.
That's right. That's funny. By the way, anybody that's watching us in chat, we've got the chat window open here. So if you have any questions for Jacky, just go ahead and post them, and hopefully I'll be on the ball well enough that I'll notice them and pass them along. Lisa posted one earlier for you, Jacky, but it's kind of a good, I think more of a good end of the interview sort of question. So Lisa, if you're watching, I will get to that a little later on. Okay, so that was playing D&D. Well, first of all, before we leave that, like what sorts of characters did you like playing D&D?
My very first character was a cleric of Kelemvor. And then I think I avoided the wizard for like the longest time out of that. So I think I got to play pretty much all the other classes before I ever touched the wizard. But I think my favorite class to play for a while, at least for role playing and everything else, I really did enjoy playing the sorcerer for a long time. I had a few sorcerer characters. I think my favorite sorcerer character was a sorcerer ranger, and that one was a half elf. And we were still playing in the Forgotten Realms, so that one was a half elf. We were playing in the Dale Lands, and so we were going through like Myth Draenor, fighting demons and red wizards all the time. I remember trying to find a way to really abuse Tensor's transformation. I remember that, and trying to find ways to like max out the amount of attacks I can make as a full attack action. And I was just going, "There's got to be a way to max this out. I'm sure I can figure it out."
Yeah. How many did you get up to? You remember?
Yeah, so with dual wielding, so that was a lot of feat investment. I probably got up to I think I got up to 7 at one point.
Yeah,
That was
sounds,
the best.
yeah.
That was pretty good.
That's
It was
a lot.
pretty good at the time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah. Okay, so how did you make the transition into DMing? I mean, I assume you at some point started running games.
Yeah, so after high school, we went to I went to college. I lost all my friends because they all went to different colleges.
Oh yeah.
But I did meet some people who who either did play D&D or wanted to learn D&D, and so I said, yeah, let's just get together and let's just play. We had like a little bit of like a food of like a meal hall for us, so we were like, oh, let's just meet on like a Saturday because they're open for like 10-12 hours on a Saturday. So we were just going, yeah, let's just do that. And plus we would have all the refreshments there because they have a fountain drinks. So it's like everyone can get water and soda all day if they wanted to sit there. So, and you know, when you're that young, it's like, oh yeah, we're going to do like those long, like 8 to 10 hour sessions of D&D because we don't know when we're going to play next or something like that. And at first the group was about maybe 5. Right. And then other people saw us play and asked to join, and in the span of a month the group turned from 5 to 20.
Oh yeah. So I mean, you can't say no. You know.
Yeah. So I think that will be the largest group I will ever GM. I will never GM that size ever again. And we did eventually transition it to a high seas kind of pirate campaign, especially when you have 20 players. You definitely have a full crew for a ship. So
right. Yeah.
So I was just going, this will work. At least this way, all of you have something to do, even on downtime.
Exactly. That's great.
Yeah, that was my very first DMing experience, was DMing for pretty much a humongous we had like 4 round tables that occupy a half of the meal hall. And so it was just 20 people playing D&D from like 11 in the morning all the way until like 9 p.m. on a Saturday, like consistently for 2 semesters. So like for a whole year, we managed to just knock that out.
That's fabulous. Okay, so let's lead into working on Dungeons and Dragons products for professionally. How did you make that transition?
So when D&D 5th edition came around, I had friends who wanted to learn about D&D, so we were going through that together. And at the time I had also started blogging, and I decided to blog about our adventures, about the things I kind of knew from my years past of GMing, not just D&D and other RPGs, and kind of just giving my take on, the things I've learned and things that might be helpful for others. And then over time, I remember when the DMs Guild launched, and that was like a place where people could start actually monetizing their ideas. And for years before, I had homebrewed things for my games, for my friends, for different people to use for their games. And I thought this would be a great opportunity for me to try something different. And that was where I kind of started. But I didn't start it right away. I kind of waited a little bit because I had a little bit of anxiety because I wasn't sure if I actually had anything worthwhile to write. And then I took that kind of big leap. And then it kind of did well. It did very well, actually. And then I kind of decided that, well, let's keep going. Let's see how long we can keep going.
when you said you took that leap and it went well, like what specifically, what was that first, the first thing that you worked on? And
so the first thing I worked on was it was Journey into the Feywild. It was a little supplement that was meant to kind of give inspirational ideas for running a story inside the Feywild. So it wasn't like a big it didn't have like a lot of systems and things like that, but it was more about concepts and looking at how you wanted to approach the Feywild, because I wanted to approach it a little bit more openly instead of having like strict guidelines or strict this is my view of what the Feywild should be. It's like, make it what you want it to be, but here's some ideas on how to approach it that way.
right.
And so that was my first supplement, and it did really well the first time around. I think it became real for me when I actually made back the money I invested into it. Because I did the thing that you should never do for your first time going out on a project, which is, invest a lot of money into it. And I did invest quite a bit of money into it. And I kind of wrote it to myself as, this is just a passion project, and I'm okay if it doesn't break even. And then it broke even in like a matter of months. And I kind of went, oh, so I made profit. Well, that's something I didn't expect. And and so I kind of decided, all right, well, let's see what happens with that. Maybe I can try to come up with something else. And I worked on a couple smaller projects for myself. And then I remember that I started seeing people doing collaborations and open calls for collaborations. And I think that's when I started taking that real leap into doing this more professionally.
Right. And when you say your expenses, what sort of expenses did you have? I mean, I'm guessing artwork maybe, or
Yeah, I actually commissioned an artist for the cover, and he's a really amazing artist, and so he did the cover for Journey to the Feywild. And also I had never because this was also my first time publishing, I had to I shouldn't say my first time publishing, but it's my first time coming back into doing like hardcore layout and publishing and things like that. So I had to do it all myself again. And so I had a little bit of experience with that when I was in high school. And so because I was actually the layout person for our high school literary magazine. So I do remember doing layout, but it's been years since I've done it. So I had to, buy back Adobe, get Adobe, buy art assets, but
right.
things like that. The art assets, it was mostly the art assets and obviously the art for the cover itself, which was the most expensive piece. So I spent several $100s for sure.
Right. Right. Right.
And I think I was getting close. I think I was like pretty much just shy of a little over $1,000 just when I got to that.
Right.
And for a first time product, that's probably, that's not especially for somebody who doesn't have anything to his name or anything else.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, this is not a wise decision. No sane person should do this. But I decided to do it anyways. And because I believed in it a lot, and it returned really well. And
That's
so
great. That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to I want to jump forward to Unbreakable, because I've really been eager to talk about this, and so
Okay.
I don't know where it's at in the timeline here, but if it's okay. So I love in the forward you say a project that exclusively focuses on Asian creators telling and illustrating their stories. And the primary goal is to establish a platform for Asian creators within the tabletop role-playing community. Well, first of all, fantastic. I mean, that right off the bat, that really makes, made me want to read more. And so tell me a little bit more about that. How did you land in that sort of, with that sort of mission?
Sure. So so I guess if I want to talk about the mission, I got to talk about how the idea got conceived, right?
Yeah,
So
sure. Do that.
so the story, so Unbreakable was conceived. I met one of my I would meet one of my fellow collaborators, Jazz, over at a dinner, in Gen Con 2019. Was it 2019? Yes, 2019. God, I can't remember what year we're in.
Yeah. By the way, that's great. You get a gold star every time you mention Gen Con. So yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, oddly enough, it was during it was after the Uncaged panel actually, and we all had dinner, and it was right before the Ennies. And so we were having dinner, and we were talking about something, and I kind of came. I had before Gen Con, I had already had this idea that I wanted to work on something that was kind of focused on like Asian encounters or focused on like Asian themes again. So I kind of want to focus on that. And I mentioned it to Jazz, and we kind of brainstormed a little bit of like how we could approach it. And then at least in terms of like the rough idea for it. And then at the time I was just thinking this was just going to be a solo project for me, most likely again. And and Jazz was thinking, I think this could be something bigger. And in September, she reached out to me and said that she could help build the framework for us to have like a space to organize and collaborate with other people. And I kind of just said, okay, well, that was more than I expected. Let's just go for it. And so we dove into it, and we started reaching out to Asian creators that were alumni within the Uncaged community. And then we were reaching out to other people that we knew in other spaces who were Asian and had done things for role-playing games or have done things in relation to the tabletop community, see if they were interested or knew people who might be interested. So we got like a fair amount of people coming in, at least interested at first. And then that was when when the contributor community and myself and Jazz, we all sat down and kind of just talked about how we wanted to take this. What did we really want out of it? And ultimately, we all came to a consensus that we wanted Unbreakable to represent Asian creators and them telling their stories and illustrating their own stories and actually having, the viewpoints of their stories. So like, and that would incorporate things of like their dysphoria, their experiences, their relationship with their cultures, and how they interact with it. So this was more personal. I think this was probably the most personal project, I think, for most of our creators. And I think that was what made it the most important in terms of how we wanted to carefully treat it. And so when we as we got further more into the production process, I remembered that a lot of our contributors, our editors and our artists especially, and a few of our writers, this was their first time writing an adventure. This was their first time working on something like a project like this. And for them to get published for a physical book, printed, and also having credits with their name in it and getting paid for their time, that was just something meaningful.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah. And one of them told me about how meaningful it was to them. And I kind of thought about, as we were getting to the final stages of production and I was writing the forward and the mission statement and everything. And I thought back about that conversation, and that conversation still lingered in my mind for the longest time. And I realized how important this was. And it wasn't just, I knew we were never going to just stop at one volume, but I started thinking about the future, and I started thinking about what Unbreakable meant and what it could mean for others in the future. And I just felt this is where it needs to be, what it should be, and what it aims and what I hope it will become.
So, I mean, obviously it sounds like you feel pretty good about how it turned out.
Yeah, I've been very happy with this so far. We're definitely right now we're actually accepting pitches for the next volumes. And so we're already accepting them. We got more in recently. And I've been the organizers, which is myself, Jazz, and Caroline, who's our art director. We've been looking through some of them. We haven't looked at all of them because we're going to spend a whole day doing that. So we kind of just been like teasing ourselves a little bit, just taking a look and seeing what pitches we've received, and just kind of being excited about it, not just for ourselves, but for those who are working with us and we had a lot of new contributors this time around. And so we're really excited to be working with a bunch of new people, and giving them this wonderful opportunity and experience.
Now, is there more than one volume out, or is it?
Right now, there's only the first volume.
Okay.
But we are planning to do probably more than one. We're gonna be we kind of grouped some themes for our contributors this time around. So right. We're probably going to be planning for multiple volumes down the road.
That's great. That's fantastic. So I have a question. Okay, well, first of all, I want to ask you, like, diversity within Asian culture. Like, I was looking through Unbreakable. I saw Chinese, Indian, Filipino, and
there's Vietnamese, Cambodian.
Vietnamese.
There's a Cambodian story in there. There's a Tibetan one in there as well.
Excellent. That's great. Yeah. And is there any way to characterize what an Asian themed adventure is like, or is within the group of Asian, is it there's just too much diversity, there's no central sort of theme, like a different, if you think about it, somebody like me who comes from a European sort of perspective, grew up playing classic Dungeons and Dragons,
So I'll say for like an Asian theme, so there is a lot of diversity within Asia itself, but there are like areas of Asia that have a lot of, I would say, similar or shared experiences.
Okay.
Like for example, like between East Asia, so that would be usually like China, the Koreas, and Japan. They usually have a lot of overlap or similarities in certain eras and periods, but if you were to look at them as a collective, they do have a lot of divergence. They have a whole lot of unique experiences that are for them, and their development of concepts and ideas actually vary a lot. I can say that because I was working on like a little project for myself, and I had to research the nine-tailed fox, and there is reference to the nine-tailed fox in Chinese mythology and in Korean mythology and in Japanese mythology. And the permutations start the same, but then they diverge a lot because then everybody has different takes, interpretations of how they are perceived, how they're perceived and received by, I guess, the people. And so because of that, they're not exactly the same thing. They're actually a different experience in different cultures. So so if I were to see somebody do that, it would be kind of like in the framework of, okay, which version are you going with? Because it's different. It's actually very different across the board. And so, and I think the thing about Asian theme adventures is that, there are some similarities, there's some overlap for sure, especially when it comes to certain time periods, religions, and other experiences. But there's enough diversity in there that if to approach it is to approach it wholeheartedly versus trying to keep it like as a blanket. So instead, it's more like focus on the specifics versus focus on the general.
Right. Well, cool. Did you have any like what sort of how were there challenges around the fact that you're making this for Dungeons and Dragons, and Dungeons and Dragons is so rooted in sort of Northern European culture in terms of character classes and so on?
Yeah, we did talk about it quite a bit, and we do recognize that sometimes that a lot of there is some limitations within the rule set, which is why we wanted to first focus it more on adventures and less so on things like the mechanical side, which are a lot more to tackle and require a lot more thought in terms of how to address them and how to respect them. which were things like classes and races and heritage and things like that, because those we couldn't just we knew that we couldn't just give a blanket approach to them. It had to be as respectful as we can to what we wanted to bring in. And so that's why we changed it to, we kept it initially as adventures. But that is not to say that Unbreakable Publishers isn't wanting to do things related to that. We just knew that if we were going to approach it, it would require a lot more extensive care and a dedicated group of contributors to do that,
Right.
especially all that work.
Oh, that's great. It seems like you kind of got to, in some cases, maybe you have to say, well, we're taking sort of a Korean perspective on this, and or a Tibetan perspective on this, because it's going to be, you can't. It strikes me you can't just say, well, we're just going to make this Asian, but no, there's just too many different ways you can go. Well, it seems like I really enjoyed looking through the book. A lot of things. I was enjoying some of the content warnings. Kat Kruger's adventure, The Lost Children, warns some players may feel uncomfortable with descriptions of child neglect and murder at the hands of flesh-eating demons. Oh, that's a good content warning.
Yep. That was something we kind of learned through, especially through Uncaged.
Right.
We wanted, a lot of us, since a good chunk of us in the beginning were alumni from Uncaged, we took a lot of those lessons, the things we learned, to heart, and we brought those lessons and techniques over for Unbreakable. And so and content warnings was definitely one that we wanted to keep, especially even in Asian stories. There's a lot of stories that can deal with, harm to children, to elderly, right. And there's also things about, like, monsters of a certain caliber, and certain themes of certain types of stories also carry their own kind of content warnings. And so it felt only fair and right that we would make sure that those warnings existed for our readers who would buy this book. Because it sometimes you have to realize, okay, this adventure may not work for me, or maybe I need to tailor this so that that way it doesn't become the things I have issues with.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think that's a great trend in RPGs in the last few years, is identifying things up front that might be problematic for certain players, just to kind of like get that out of the way. Warning flags. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So I didn't have a chance to read the whole book, but I read a couple of the ones. I read Cargo of Melons. For some reason that jumped out.
I always love talking about that adventure, just because you have to bring a melon to the halls of the underworld. What?
Yeah, several of them, right? It's
several of them. Yep.
Yeah,
several of them. And it's also for a salamander demon, and it's from an estranged mother trying to ask you to bring melons to their estranged son who's trying to get a job.
Yes. You learn out. He's not really in as high a position in the underworld as you might have been led to think. I love that there's a part about the players having to figure out how they're going to get to hell. And so one option is that the player characters can take a lethal dose of poison and trust that the person they're going to go see in hell will resurrect them. Is anybody taking you up on that? Have you heard of any playtest groups where the player said, yeah, let's do that. Let's all take poison?
I'm sure it's been thought of, but I will say that I personally haven't seen anyone take up that gumption yet. But I would love to see someone do it, just because it is that is truly a method. I have I think in some Chinese stories they do usually do that sort of thing, where it's like, I need to kind of go to the underworld. What's the best way to do it? Well, I can kill you. Well, that's the fastest way. That's true.
Yeah, I mean, that's funny. I just think it's, I mean, you do that at the beginning of the adventure. If it doesn't work out, you haven't invested that much time, right? It's a good point in an adventure arc to die.
Yeah, it's a great way to to have your players start talking about like, so we need to talk about character deaths.
Right.
The first thing you talk about in that session is, so we need to talk about character deaths, and if you're okay with your characters dying, so you can go and actually do the story.
Right. Content warning: you're gonna die in the first 10 minutes of the session.
That's a great way to start a session. It's like, you're gonna die in the first 10 minutes. Have fun.
I think that'd just be a great way to run D&D game. By the way, content warnings. Number one, you might die. I mean, that should be a content warning, right? In every D&D game, you might die. That's I
definitely
mean, disturbing to some people. Death, you know.
That is very true. Especially since like especially for like a lot of the higher tier adventures, if you had players who've been playing these characters from like a very early level all the way through, you know, they get very attached to them, and you know, they could they might have a lot of feelings about, you know, letting their characters die. Versus if you're running this particular adventure as a one shot, well, it's okay if your character dies.
Right. Well, I've run games where I've had player characters in the ongoing campaign, right? And you know, they're playing in my campaign because, you know, I'm DMing and stuff like that. And then they go off to a convention, and they'll come back, and they'll like, oh, I picked up these items at an adventure in the convention. Like, no, you didn't. No, right. And then, but the same logic is, you go out and get your character killed. Oh, yeah, not until the end. You're still fine. So in this, so hell, they go to hell, but it's called Daiyu. Did I say that correctly? Fusion Buddhist and traditional Chinese version of hell. And so not too many spoiler alerts here, but I'm going to give away 3 of the names of the levels of hell. There's the hell of hanging by the sinews. Yeah, that sounds particular. And there's 18 levels of hell, right? In Daiyu. Yeah, and there's the hell of tongue ripping. That's charming. And the hell of dismemberment by vehicles. I thought that was particularly like specific, right? I mean, you could have the hell of dismemberment. That seems like a specific enough category right there, but no, it's not. It's only dismemberment by vehicles.
Yeah, and the dismemberment by vehicles, it's all, so a lot of those hells are different forms of punishment, which is not too far different from, you know, the European Christian approach to hell, which is also the levels of hell are a form of punishment. But these are and very similar to regular D&D even. It's a very bureaucratic environment. So it's very bureaucratic. It's kind of done in the viewpoint of kind of about like as if you're in a corporation in an office space. So, you know, everyone's going through internal promotions, examinations to get into a better position.
There's even some advice on like it even says in Chinese hell or in Daiyu, you tend to run into people of your family, like people that die. It even has some interesting advice on how to role play members of the dead family. Like they're going to be asking why you don't pay more respect to their memories, and why and please donate money so that they can get their lives back or something like that. It was pretty good.
Yeah. So in a lot of Chinese tradition, so in a lot of especially in Chinese mythology, there is no technical heaven. I mean, there is heaven, but it's not in the traditional sense that, you know, everybody like good people go to it. It's like, no, everyone just goes to hell. That's just the facts. There's not a whole lot of in between, and heaven is kind of reserved for like the more for more of the enlightened. And so if you didn't spend your time getting yourself into a better spiritual position, you're probably going to end up in hell, or probably get stuck in a version of limbo. And the thing is, in Chinese culture, I mean, also in a couple of other Asian cultures, reverence to your elders and to your ancestors is a big part of our culture. And so, you know, there's always the part about how your ancestors are get upset at you for not showing reverence to them and things like that. So yeah, going to hell and then bumping into them. Oh yeah, they will more or less berate you about the fact it's like, why are you not respecting me? Why didn't you make a prayer for me? You made a prayer. The last time you made a prayer was 8 years ago. What the hey? And like and it's like, just because I was your sister's sister, your mother's sister, doesn't mean I don't get some level of respect. And
Right.
something like that. And the thing is too, in the Chinese afterlife, money is usually there is a lot of funerary rites in Chinese culture deals with burning fake paper money that is then that is inferred and sent to your ancestors to use for paying their way through the afterlife, because even in the afterlife you still have to deal with the burdens of life. So
Yeah.
you still have to sometimes barter, you sometimes have to bribe, you sometimes have to pay for things. So
Yeah, you
you
still
gotta
need
have it.
money. Yeah,
You
you
still need
can't get away
money.
from it. Yeah. Hey, we you just got a really nice compliment from Chaotic Anarchy in
Uh-huh.
chat. I love Jacky's work. He brings so much beauty and depth to his work. So thank you,
Aw,
Chaotic
thank
Anarchy.
you.
I agree. I didn't realize how much I loved his work until recently, but and so you also wrote one of the adventures in this project, The Last Guest, and in fact you were just talking about how someone might have been able to live a just enough life to go to heaven. It
Mhm.
sounds like the Jade Hermit might be someone like that.
Yeah. So usually, so if you're talking from like a Buddhist tradition, more, it's not really. So there is the celestial plane, which is ruled by like gods and Buddhas and other deity and other kinds of deities, and then there's, in the Buddhist sense, you're trying to actually reach is nirvana. So because if you die, you have to go through the stages of reincarnation and
Right.
things like that. But the ultimate goal is to be enlightened enough to escape that cycle and be out of the system. So basically it's to get out of that whole cycle. And if you're enlightened enough, you can reach nirvana. And so the Jade Hermit kind of has reached that point,
Yeah.
especially since the adventure was written to be more higher tiered, for higher tier adventure play. So I figured, well, this hermit has lived long enough. I think should be enlightened enough to be like, okay, I'm ready to go and die now. But before I go,
Right. Right. Well, and the players have to go and try and resolve all this, without giving anything away. But there's a lot of tension between a bunch of these animal spirits, right, who
yep,
are connected to him in some way, and the players have to
yep,
go and figure out how
yep.
to resolve a lot of animosity that exists between them.
Yeah. So the story is actually inspired from that is a variation and a take on the origins of the Chinese zodiac.
Oh, okay.
So in the origins of the Chinese zodiac, the immortal emperor actually calls for a banquet, and so what happens is that the emperor demands that the animals come and pay homage, and obviously also to come and partake in the banquet.
But by the way,
And
knowing from our conversation as we were getting ready for this interview that your adventure would involve eating does not surprise me too much. So anybody
right.
watching may not realize this, but Jacky and I spent most of our prep time talking about food because Jacky is quite the culinary hobbyist, if you will.
Yep. Um, and funny enough, like food is a big aspect of of like not just Chinese culture, but all Asian cultures.
Right.
So we actually do have like a theme for our next Unbreakable around food. So I'm looking forward to reading those pitches. Um, but for Last Guest, there is a banquet, and so it is inspired from the story for the Chinese zodiac and the origins of it. And so so you have the animals of that would become the Chinese zodiac arrive for the banquet, and there's also the additional bit of where the rat it actually tells the cat the wrong start time for the party,
Right.
and so so the cat misses the entire party, and so that's the justification for why the cat is not written into the Chinese zodiac. And because of that, also the cat and the rat had animosity from that point on, and so that's why cats and rats usually do not get along. So it
Oh,
has like that very fable approach to it.
yeah.
And so I wanted to take that and I wanted to turn it a little bit more. And I wanted to focus on like, well, they already had the banquet. What about the next time they have a banquet?
Right.
And so why don't we? And so I kind of wanted to approach it differently. I didn't want it to be like an immortal emperor, but I did want like a Jade Hermit. And I thought, okay, well, in this hermit is at the end of their life. They know it's coming, but they're ready to accept it and move on. But
Right.
before they move on, let's have one last banquet. But the problem is, over the years, all the spirits have had some grievances with each other, or they kind of faded away, or they kind of gone on their own devices, and there might be some subtle manipulation involved by someone who's been wronged in the past. So, you know,
Right.
it was a nice way to approach it, and kind of bring everybody back to the fold for this one last banquet. It is definitely the longest adventure in the volume. I did try to write it small in less pages, but as some of my fellow editors and contributors have told me, there was no other way this could have been written, and this
Yeah.
was probably the most unapologetic story from me. That it's like
Well,
there's no other way it could be written.
yeah, no, I thought it was a great read, and I think there is there's got to, what's wrong with having, you have an anthology of adventures. There's one
Mhm.
of them, why not have one that's really big and epic that takes I imagine it probably took 3 or 4 sessions to play it.
Yeah,
Um,
we kind of timed it where it's like it's gonna need about 3 to 4 good sessions
yeah,
at
yeah,
the very least.
that, that's great. It's great to have one of those in there. I think that's fantastic. Hey, we're running I had a bunch of projects I wanted to talk about. I'm going to jump down because we're running low on time here. But just to let everybody else know, this book we've been talking about, Unbreakable, is a fantastic book. It's like 200 and some pages. It's big. There's lots of like 10 adventures. Highly recommend it. You've also wrote a book called Eyes Unclouded. You were also wrote in the Uncaged Anthology, Volume 3. But I want to get down to Unbridled. By the
Yeah.
way, it seems to be a trend that you are involved with a lot of companies or projects that start with the word "un," like un this, un that.
Yeah, it's definitely an inside joke among the Uncaged community, especially for for all the contributors, because Ashley had accrued such a large contributor community out of that for
Yeah,
Uncaged, because it was like 100 adventures, and then you had on top of that all these artists on top of it. So it's like it's a big family. We're a big family,
sure.
and so Uncaged gave so many creators the confidence to start and launch their own anthologies, their own projects,
Right.
and
Nice.
so because of that, so that's why our name is Unbreakable, because it's to pay homage to our heritage, and a lot of other concepts would follow along afterwards. And Unbridled definitely had nice little tongue-in-cheek play to it as well. And I won't
Well,
lie that sometimes we do the other contributors. We do joke about like, let's do another anthology together. What should we call it this one?
yes, yes, yes. Got to start with the word "un." Yes.
Yeah.
By the way, you had another. We have a question. What project is closest to your heart? This is from Chaotic Anarchy, or the project you
Um,
are most proud of. Either.
I think the project I'm most proud of is definitely Unbreakable. For what it stands for what it
Yeah.
means for so many people, and for what I hope it will mean for more to come. And I mean, I'm just a custodian at this point, and I'm just happy to make sure that that people's stories are being told, and that they have a means to actually have a way to get into the tabletop industry, because I want to give them an opportunity to have something that's like, hey, this is now a piece of your that can go for your resume. This is
Right.
an
Right.
experience for you, and we're hoping to give more to them soon, and in other ways besides just contributing. And so we want to be able to grow and nurture these experiences into something more, so that we can have more creators that take on these more leadership positions. And because as much as I love being the helm of Unbreakable, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I would really like to eventually have a day where I'm like, this will one day be handed down to somebody else, and I can look forward to watching it grow beyond me.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. Okay, I said we are going to talk about Unbridled. We got just a couple of minutes. Give us oh, can I? Let me tell. I just want to read a couple of quotes about. Like, you don't have to go any further than the DM's Guild, splash page. It says, featuring hags and unicorns, each of which provides a unique and bizarre take on the theme, handpicked from pitches by an unnerving array of enthusiastic and almost entirely unvetted authors. To which Jeremy Crawford responded, more stories should feature hags riding unicorns. That is all. And then it goes on to say, slay the cookie unicorns of the apocalypse, save an evil witch from the injustices of unicorn court, drift into an astral laser cooking battle, steal taxidermied unicorn thirst trap. Oh, anything you want to add?
Well, I will say that I was very happy to contribute an adventure to that anthology. And of course I wrote about, cookie unicorns of the apocalypse, because why not?
Okay, so you got the cookies. Okay,
I got the cookies. I wrote
unicorns.
Gingerbread cookie unicorns. So they're giant, they're huge, anatomically sized unicorns made out of gingerbread, and I have one for every aspect of the apocalypse. So there's one for war, pestilence, famine, and death.
Oh my god, that's fantastic.
Yes, and for mine, there was a hag who had been swindled out, who had been kicked out of a baking competition and wanted revenge.
Yes, that would drive anyone to hagdom.
and just go, I'm gonna one up that, and I'm gonna bring in these giant unicorns made out of gingerbread.
Oh gosh. I might squeeze in one quick comment about Uncaged, because you talk so glowingly about it. And I have Ashley Warren will be a guest on my show here soon. Help me sort of foreshadow Ashley's arrival on this show. Like,
okay.
Uncaged, why are you such an admirer of this production?
So Uncaged, Uncaged gave a lot of opportunities to so many contributors. So Uncaged had a combined total across all 4 volumes about over 150, maybe close to 150, maybe a little less, but it's like over 100 contributors, both writers, artists, and editors combined. And so for a vast majority of those people, this was their first published work. It was going to be something that they could have as a physical hard, that they ended up getting a physical copy for, that had their names in it. Right. And it means so much for a first-time creator, or a creator who's starting in their career. They're probably maybe in their career path, where they have something that has their name on it, that has their credits in it.
Yeah,
it just means so much to somebody, and it can truly change somebody and tell them that they can write for something of this scale, that they can belong in the community and in the industry. And because of that, it birthed so many adjacent projects. Right. And so that's how you have and that helped thrive. You saw a big boom in the DM's Guild through it. Right. And a lot of these other creators would eventually start growing out of, I wouldn't say completely growing out of it, but just growth from it. Right. And go into other spaces. Because I can tell you, for me personally, while I was working on Uncaged, when I was working on my adventure for Uncaged, when I finished submitting it, it gave me the confidence boost to actually submit myself for a couple publishers and see if I could work at least for like a couple freelance jobs. Right. And I did. I actually got to contribute for Paizo's Lost Omens, Gods and Magic. And that was and I was really blessed to have that opportunity. I mean, I got a couple more later from other places, but the point was, I got to watch that community of creators have the strength and confidence to say, I can make something, I can do something. And And there we went, and then there were so many adventures and projects later. It got to a point where I remember there was a point where I couldn't keep up with the many ideas that were being thrown around, and it got to a point where we all had to say to each other, don't overcommit, just pick the ones you like to try to work for, and go from there.
Right. So Lisa Penrose asked us to ask you, what is one lesson you've learned as you've grown as a designer? And we're running out of time, so keep this brief.
So the one lesson I've learned as I've grown is that I think the most important thing is to understand what your game. I think the most important thing I've learned is that what does your game mean to people, and what kind of message you're sending through that, because RPGs in general are like an art form, and because of that, you can say a whole lot through what you write, what you create, and you have to take ownership of that, and you have to be responsible with that.
Oh, and that's a great segue into my last question for this season for each of my guests, which is, what do you hope to bring to Dungeons and Dragons through the community of this great game community that's been around for so long?
I hope to bring more Asian stories, for one, because I know it's definitely been one that haven't had a whole lot of opportunities to be explored sometimes, and I think it needs to have a space to at least say, these are the stories, these are our voices. But what I'm glad it's doing, and what I'm hoping it will eventually start doing, is that it will inspire other voices to gather together and also say, let's also tell our stories from our viewpoints and our experiences. And so I'm really glad that I'm slowly seeing hints of that elsewhere. That's and great. That's really what my goal is and hope for that is that, that everyone has the opportunity and the ability to tell their stories and have a platform to do it.
It's fantastic. And if anybody out there is listening and is thinking like maybe a project like that for Middle Eastern stories, I would line up for that for sure. My personal passion and history is I love Middle Eastern history, Middle Eastern cultures, and mythology and stuff like that. So obviously there's a lot that can be done with the Americas and with Africa and so on. It would, I think this is a great trend. And Jacky, I'd say you're doing it. I mean, good job. And what you want to bring to the community is not just a hypothetical. It's something you really are doing, and I respect you for that.
Thank you. It's been a lot of work, and we're just getting started.
Well, yeah. Well, it's of course it's a lot of work. That's why they call it work. All the fun words are taken, right? You couldn't call it festival. Called arcade work, but it's good work. It's great work. Jacky, it's been a pleasure having you on the show, and I hope to see you in the real world at some point, maybe at a future Gen Con. Yeah, that'd be great.
I would love to. I'm really hoping to come back to another Gen Con. I know I have a lot of friends who make plans for it. Yeah, me too. So we are looking forward to whenever we can come back to Gen Con.
Let's do that. Let's get together in Indianapolis, hopefully next year.
Yes, I would love that.
All right. Well, thank you again. That wraps up another episode of Fireside with Peter Adkison on Gen Con TV. My guest next week on September 30th will be Mackenzie Diarmaz, who was the lead writer for the Islands of Sinauna and a co-designer of Kingdoms and Warfare. Oh, can't wait to find out what that's about. But that's a whole week away. Don't worry, we have lots of other great programming here on Gen Con TV. We have table takes on Friday at 2 p.m. Pacific time. On Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific, we have board games with the brothers Murph. On Wednesday at 1:30 p.m., we have board games with This Game Gets Dicey. And then at 4 o'clock, back to Fireside with me. If you miss any of our shows, you can find all of our streams about a day or so later uploaded on the Gen Con video channel of YouTube, including all the episodes we filmed searching for untold stories behind not only Dungeons and Dragons, but also Magic the Gathering. Also, if you want to connect with other Gen Con fans, I encourage you to join our Gen Con Discord server. So please remember to follow, subscribe, turn on notifications, tell your friends. And thanks again, once again, to our guest, Jacky Leung, our studio manager, Marcus Mays, our producer, Derek Gooder, to Dungeon Masters Guild and Lisa Penrose for introducing us to the new voices in Dungeons and Dragons, and to Gen Con TV for hosting us. But most of all, thank you for watching.